Welcome to Meet the Chief Analytics Officer, a new career-oriented interview series presented by the IT Executives Council. My name is Lindsay Brown, Executive Director of the IT Executives Council, and today I am very excited to present our latest Meet the CIO interview. In this series, we interview top IT executives from some of the most interesting companies and organizations in the world. These interviews provide our members and subscribers with invaluable firsthand insights as they focus tips and ultimately secrets to success. With that being said, I'm excited to offer our viewers a new and unique perspective today from a Chief Analytics Officer. So today's session will be more focused on data culture, and the use of data to improve mission critical operations by talking with a technology leader who focuses exclusively on data as a Chief Analytics Officer. With that, there's no better time to introduce our esteemed panelist, Adam Leonard. Adam is currently the Chief Analytics Officer at the Texas Workforce Commission and is a national leader in the use of data to improve governmental program effectiveness, efficiency, and accountability, particularly in the National Workforce Development System. He is responsible for analytics, reporting, and business transformation at the Texas Workforce Commission. Adam, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. I'll let you share a little bit about your current role and background before we get to the Q&A today.
All right, thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is obviously a very exciting time to be in this field and working in analytics. And quite frankly, it's an exciting time to be doing this in government because government tends to lag the private sector, of course, in terms of adopting new technologies and things like that. And so in the private sector, analytics has really had a place from the beginning in terms of looking at operations, looking at things that lead to profit or efficiencies and whatnot. And it wasn't seen immediately exactly how we could use that in government. And the reality is that there's a lot of ways that we can use it. And there is a real bipartisan belief in the idea of using evidence to inform policy making, and that's kind of where me and my people come in. So with that.
That's awesome. So thanks for sharing that background. So we'll get right to our Q&A.
Okay.
All right, I'll start from the very beginning. What inspired you to pursue a career in data analytics?
I think it just kind of happened in a way. So here's the funny thing. I have a BA in government and I have a master's in public affairs. And so most people kind of, when they first learn that, they go, well, how did you end up in analytics, much less as the Chief Analytics Officer? Because I have all of 6 hours of statistics in my formal education. So I started actually as a consumer of data. So I was involved in a program area at a different state agency, and I would take data and use it for risk modeling, for sampling, for identifying outliers and abusive behavior amongst the participants and those that we regulated in that system. And so I firsthand had an opportunity to realize the value that data could have in terms of meeting an organization's mission. And so after about 10 years of working on that, an opportunity opened up at the Workforce Commission. And at that time, the idea was, or that the group that I was joining was primarily involved with reporting. So this is in 2003. And so it's all the official reporting that agencies have to do to the government, right? We get money, whether it's federal money or state money, and in our case, it's mostly federal money. And with that comes responsibility for reporting certain performance measures and achieving certain goals and things like that. And I think that analytics in general kind of started there with KPIs and those types of things. But really, when I got there, I thought that this is not what it needs to be. Like, we were spending 80% of our time ad hocing data for standard reporting monthly, on a monthly basis. And it just didn't make any sense because, I mean, we were getting our stuff in and maybe that was keeping our federal partners from, bugging us, but no one was really using the data. I mean, we would go over it every month, but no one was making decisions. There were no insights. There was no value being derived from it other than going, oh, you know who's having a problem with this program? It's, you know, we got to go talk to these guys, which is not the same thing as actually improving the program. That's just providing technical assistance or doing some monitoring or whatnot. And so, you know, as I was kind of studying these different things, I was really looking at the idea that, or came to the conclusion that data is the greatest underutilized asset that most organizations have, right? So we've got our people, we've got our customers who are an incredible resource in terms of fulfilling the mission, communicating with them, understanding their needs, and orienting around that. But we have our data, and our data is our history, right? You know, we can learn from our past, it can inform our present, and it can guide our future if we do it right. And so that realization, I guess, is what kind of allowed me to think about what I wanted to pitch to our organization about how do we go from being a data reporting organization to a, you know, data obsessed organization.
Yeah, that's a great background. And that kind of gets us into our next question is what are the roles and responsibilities of a chief analytics officer and how has that changed over time?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously the role is a little bit different in each organization. And so I think it's kind of a mix of several different things, but there's probably different levels of emphasis depending on what that organization needs and where it is in its journey in terms of building out this function. So when we started at my agency at the Workforce Commission in Texas, there was a lot more building to do. And so there was a lot more talking about data literacy and culture and, you know, trying to build the demand and communicating what it could do for people. But as it starts to mature, what you start to really focus on is more of a strategic leadership and trying to ensure that analytics is aligned with and enhancing the organization's ability to meet its mission, right? So understanding what is the agency trying to accomplish or the program's trying to accomplish, what data shows whether it is or is not accomplishing it, and then digging down into the business processes and into the service delivery or well, really more the service delivery and the way that we interact with our customers to figure out what works and what doesn't work, or rather what works best for whom. Because I tend to think, and this is something I'm trying to prove now, but my hypothesis is that most services work, they just don't all work the same for everybody. And so if we could figure out which services tend to work best for different people and make those services available to them as an option, that would be a way to improve efficiency and impact. So really kind of getting in close with the program areas. I like to think of, you know, what we do as kind of the bridge between the technology and the business process, right? So you have our technology shops, and their job is to really focus on capturing data, building secure systems, building usable systems that make it easier for people to do their jobs. And ours is to then try to take that data and extract value and insights out of it and communicate that. Many organizations also, of course, in this role are going to emphasize data governance and data management, and that includes things like quality, integrity, security, compliance sometimes, because again, depending on the organization and whether it's government or even private sector, there are a lot of regulations that might apply to what you can do with the data and how you have to store it and what you're allowed to collect or not collect and duration. So that's part of it. There is developing kind of the roadmap. What's the long range plan for this? And a lot of that is tied to communication with your stakeholders and collaborating with them. So your partners and your stakeholders trying to make sure you understand where they're going, building a roadmap that can help you get there, and then helping to execute that. And then the last thing is really critical, especially like I'm in Austin, Texas, which is a very big tech center, and that is talent management and talent development, right? So what we tend to think about is the idea that this stuff has become a lot easier to teach than it used to be. And so we don't necessarily need a person with a ton of experience. We need a person who's got aptitude and interest and ideally passion for the kind of work that we're trying to do. And we'll help them kind of get the skills they need and give them the opportunity to grow and to develop them. And then hopefully let them, realize that their work is having an impact on the lives of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people in our state, and possibly even people across the country if it becomes a best practice that we share with others. I've kind of touched a little bit on the change that I'd say the role has, that it depends in part on where you are on your journey, but just I think that a couple of key things is that moving past operational analytics, the idea of efficiency and trying to just kind of work through your business process, and now really kind of melding the data with business transformation. So how do you actually significantly change the way that the business works or the organization does its job in order to meet its mission? Obviously, data governance and privacy has become more of a front burner issue. There are states that are starting to pass their own privacy laws. We've got Europe relatively recently passed a very significant privacy law. Those things are going to have rippling effects and things that we need to take care of. But the thing that's on the horizon right now, how is the role changing? Artificial intelligence and generative AI in particular is those are huge changes. Like when I started in this, the idea of moving from, to causation was not really on anybody's roadmap in terms of data analytics. It was all about correlations and things like that and predictive analytics, and not digging into, well, but can we, ascribe cause to this? And so using machine learning and evidence building is a very new thing. Generative AI is about to change the world. I'm a big believer in that, but it's a big concern for me and my organization, because our job is to help ensure that workers have the skills necessary to do the jobs that employers need. And if in 5 years, half of the jobs in the country are going to change as a result of generative AI, that's a lot of people that we need to be able to help adapt to the change. So the only last thing is that this whole thing, I hope you can tell, is that the role has shifted to one of cultural transformation, that it's not just about the data, it's about working with people and changing their understanding of how we can partner and leverage this incredible resource we have. We have more data than at any time in history. We create more data every day than at any time in history. And the tools that are available to us are easier to get and easier to learn than at any time in history.
Yeah, that's great. So, we certainly have more data than ever. So I know with all these emerging technologies, the responsibilities are always growing, always changing. That's something that our CIOs even always articulate in these interviews. So I know you mentioned that data is such an underutilized asset. So I'm very interested in hearing your answer to this. What is the most interesting data project you have worked on?
There are a couple, but the one that I think I have to cite is kind of, it was one of the more challenging problems, and it was one of the more interesting problems. During the pandemic, at the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, a very well-meaning Congress created an entirely new type of unemployment insurance program for gig workers and contract workers and other self-employed people. And I am in no way faulting their motivations or what they were trying to accomplish. But the problem is that from a fraud standpoint, there were very few controls that you could use to try to verify. So for a normal UI claim, we get data from employers every quarter that tell us this person works for me. And so when a normal when a claim is normally filed, it's only for a person who is a W-2 worker who worked truly in an employee-employer relationship for an employer who, you know, pays taxes and everything. So we had something to bounce it against, and we had other things to bounce it against. And we also had a fairly reasonable volume of claims. And what happened is that in the first couple of months of the pandemic, between this new program and just the massive effect that it had on existing workers, we saw claims shoot up by about 1,200%. And we took more claims in the first 6 months of the pandemic than we took in the entire Great Recession, which was like 3 years and change. So that all hit at once. We're running on a mainframe from the 90s. It could not handle, you know, what we needed. We had a fraud tool that we had bought that was essentially, I call it an appliance because it was essentially a server, and it was a pretty good fraud tool, but it choked on the files we were sending it. It couldn't handle the volume. And so we had to build from scratch an entirely new system in order to detect fraud, because as a result of data breaches that you've all seen on you know, headlines of retail or you know, big data brokers having their, you know, their data stolen, these fraudsters have incredible troves of information about everybody. And so they were filing claims in people's names that were very clean. They had the right social security number, they had the right date of birth, they have all this stuff. And we needed to have a way to try to detect these things in mass. So this project, we paid out since the beginning of the pandemic just under $59 billion in benefits paid. We believe that in the first 37 months of that, we were able to prevent about $4.2 billion in fraud from being paid out through these efforts. And that less than 0.7% of the benefits that we actually paid, so less than 0.7% of the $59 billion were fraudulent. And that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't, you know, actually built this new project. Now, we did bring somebody in to help us get started. I had a lot of people with great skills, but not a ton of experience yet. So we had them working hand in hand. And we have a constantly evolving system because the fraudsters change constantly as well. So in terms of, you know, real impact and challenge and working under stress, it was a very significant accomplishment to get that up and running, to get our staff to the point where not only were they contributing, but they took the whole thing over and have built 2 generations on top of what we originally built, and they continue to iterate.
That's great. I mean, 4.2 billion is certainly a huge impact prevented.
Yep.
All right. Next question. What have been the most significant keys to your success?
I think a lot of it. So when I started at the agency, remember I said that at my old agency, I was a data consumer.
Mm-hmm.
So I understood what it meant to, I mean, I was still also a data analyst. I would ask for data and then I would interpret that data. And in this agency, we didn't have as much of that. We had more people asking for data, but the people who were asking for it didn't always know what they wanted and they didn't necessarily know how to interpret it. And so at the beginning, the real key was being a bridge, right? That essentially the program people knew program and the data people knew how to pull data, but the context wasn't there. And that's what I was trying to, you know, that role what I was trying to fulfill and start to spread out, right? So that data literacy thing, explaining to the program people what this data meant and how to interpret it. And also trying to get the data people on my side to start understanding, you know, past the ones and zeros, like, well, what does this data mean in the context of a program, so that over time, the quality of what they're producing gets better. And one of the things that we really had to do was we had to stop providing people what they asked for and start asking what they're trying to accomplish so that we didn't have to redo the work. Because if you give somebody exactly what they're asking for and they don't really know what they need, so they ask for what they think they need, but it's not the right thing, then we do it twice. But if we ask them, okay, well, what problem are you trying to solve? And we say, okay, what you want is kind of close, but if we do it this way, it's going to get you exactly what you want. That's the answer. One of my mottos is data is a team sport, and it's an interdisciplinary team sport. I don't just mean that it's data people working together. I mean, it's data people and program people and other stakeholders working together in order to understand what the others do and to collaborate effectively together. And those have been real keys to success.
Yeah, that's great. I love the phrase, building a bridge, because I think that's relevant not only in data, but in, some of the IT roles we speak to as well.
Sure.
Okay, thanks for sharing those. Now we're also interested, are there any tools or solutions that help you be more effective in your role?
I'm really kind of an integrator. I take from lots of places. Sometimes it's directly from analytics but not, sometimes it's things that I'm pulling from other spaces that I just see a way to adapt, or a concept that I think that, fits into the messaging or fits into the construct that I'm trying to work with. But really the thing is that especially now, there isn't a specific tool or solution. And the reason I say that is even though I've got tools and solutions, like right now we're really shifting towards Python, natural language processing, starting to, much heavier into machine learning, moving away from traditional evaluation techniques like multiple regression and things like that. I mean, we're doing it and we're still using it, and there's a place for it, but it's not the only thing, whereas it used to be like one of the only things we did from an evaluation standpoint. We're using Tableau an awful lot, but that's where we are today. 5 years ago, Python wasn't on our radar. R was on our radar, and we were kind of starting to experiment with that. But so the key is, don't get too invested in any one thing, because the more invested you get in one thing, the more infrastructure you build around one or two things, the harder it is for you to shift to newer technologies that may be better. I mean, we had talked earlier about generative AI and how much that could change things. I've been experimenting with it, and a lot of my staff have as well. Now we're not using any agency private data. We're not, connecting it to anything that's sensitive, but we're taking things like press releases or other publicly available data sets, and we're loading it into ChatGPT and asking it questions and asking it to write us up like press releases, and just seeing the types of things it can do. And it's really good. I mean, is it publishable on first draft? No, but it's so much easier to edit than it is to write from a blank screen, that there's a real opportunity there. So we have to be ready to shift and to figure out how do we integrate these tools into what we're doing in order to become more effective and efficient. So that's really kind of my thing, is it's more about concepts than it is specific tools, because if you understand the concepts, you can get there. That, and then the reality is that these tools like generative AI, they're incredible code writers. So we've got Python today as a big deal. There'll be something else in a year or two that like takes its place. And if it does, generative AI is going to be able to help us convert all of our Python code to this new, whatever this new thing is, if it proves that it has value that goes beyond what Python can do. So we really want to be an all tools in the toolbox kind of organization. And I think that that's the best standard to be thinking about, especially since the open source community is so incredible. There are so many powerful tools there, and they are so supportive of each other in terms of publishing, like, hey, here's a cool thing I did, and here's the problem it solves, and here's the code and the documentation behind it. That, I said data is a team sport. Sometimes the team, the members of the team don't even realize they're working as a team. They're just contributing to the kind of ecosystem.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing those. It's a really good perspective there. Now, you shared so much great advice today, but let's talk about what advice you would give to others that seek a career as a chief analytics officer.
So I think it kind of depends in part on like where you are in the process. Like, are you a data analyst who's trying to work their way up into management and then work their way into more of a leadership position and then work their way up to potentially being a chief analytics officer? Or are they someone who's further up on that journey? And so I guess there are certain things that are really key. The first that I would say is that you have to be able to really work well with people who do not have your background and your skill set. You have to understand that their skills being very different than yours and their knowledge being very different than yours doesn't, you have to understand what their thing is, because they're your customer. So if they can't work with you because you can't understand them or communicate effectively with them, then that's a problem. And like kind of early in my career, I ran into some stumbles along the way because I was relying on just being a smart guy and not necessarily listening enough. And so I think that listening, asking questions, making suggestions, don't just say yes when someone asks you to do a thing. Make sure you understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And so kind of demonstrating that, and that builds trust because they're realizing it's like, oh, you're a partner in this process. Promoting the idea of, again, data literacy, helping them understand more, because now not only are you a trusted individual who gets what they want, but you are somebody who is helping them develop some of their skills so that they can be more effective as well. The other thing that I would say is that you really should go out there and find other people who are doing this work. The community is fairly large. There are a lot of people doing this work, whether you're in public sector or private sector. There are networks of people who are doing this, who have different levels of skill and different levels of experience. And I don't know, I haven't found, there are certainly people who don't want to share, who are, they play competitive. They think that if they give away their secret sauce, it's somehow going to disadvantage them. And certainly for some very big companies or whatever, they may not want to do that. But I don't know. I've reached a point where I'm really interested in mentoring others and helping them come along. And I see that in so many other people. It's one of the things that attracts me to this space, and the opportunity to kind of work with people in other states and other national organizations, because I do think that data is still the greatest underutilized resource in government, and probably many other organizations. And so this is kind of a life's mission now to try to make sure that by the time I'm done, that's no longer the case.
That's awesome. Well, with that mission and you sharing this information with us and our viewers today, I think we can achieve that.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and to talk a little bit about kind of the questions that you asked and a little my journey and some thoughts. And I am someone who I'm happy to, find me on LinkedIn. I publish some stuff on there. I'm happy to talk to people if you've got questions. I really do believe in sharing and collaborating with others, even people outside my field. And especially like if you're interested in generative AI or you're doing stuff in that space, like we all need to be working hard on that and thinking about it, because it's going to be the biggest thing to happen in perhaps our lifetimes.
Yeah, that's great. So be sure to connect with Adam if you're into data and looking to learn more. So I just want to give a quick thank you to everyone, Adam in particular. If you found today's session valuable, please be sure to visit our website to see a list of upcoming interviews. And if you're interested in participating, feel free to visit the URL on your screen, itexecutivescouncil.org/meet-the-CIO. All right, well, one last time, thanks again for your time and great success to you, Adam.
Thank you.
In 2023 and beyond.